All right, hello everyone. Welcome to my channel. I'm Thomas. I do videos on many different subjects, um, particularly on the esoteric and obscure. And today we're doing, I believe it's the 51st video on the reciprocal system of theory, which was developed by Dewey B. Larson back in the 20th century up until he died in 1990. He has many, many different books. Most of them are on scientific subjects, chemistry and astronomy and physics, and various permutations of those. He also has 2 books on economics. We are looking right now at his final book, which came out after he died, that is called Beyond Space and Time. And this book is mainly on metaphysics, religion, psychology, philosophy, and some biology. Now, we also, this is, I believe, the 29th video that we've done on this book. Now, just to give you a brief overview of Larson, he had kind of an epiphany around 1930, where he was doing some various scientific experiments. He was a mining engineer, I believe, some kind of engineer, and he was working on some stuff on the side. And it took him about 20 years of calculations and so on to kind of narrow his focus down, and he eventually came up with 2 fundamental postulates, the gist of which is, and then he took those postulates and through a process of deduction, he developed the basic parameters of the reciprocal system. I did about 15 videos earlier on the talk that he gave from 1986 that is called The Outline of the Deductive Development of the Reciprocal System. So if you watch those videos, you can kind of see how his thought progression goes. But the gist of it is that unlike the Greeks, who thought that the universe was made out of matter, and Einstein, who substituted in matter, energy for matter with E equals mc squared, and so is kind of saying that the universe is made out of energy, Larson says that because of E equals mc squared and that energy and matter can be converted one to another, that means that neither one of those things can be the fundamental thing that the universe is made out of. And he looks more at the c squared part, the speed of light squared. Larson says that the universe is made out of motion. Motion, for Larson, other people have come up with that, including Thomas Hobbes, I believe Rene Descartes, and I think the astronomer Arthur Eddington. I'm not sure about the Eddington part, but they didn't make it work because they didn't really redefine motion. But Larson turned around and defined motion as the relationship between space and time. So anytime you have a time over space or space over time relationship, you have motion. And he says that time and space are reciprocals of each other, which also means that they are the same as each other, except that they are reciprocals, meaning that what quality one has, the other also has. And so by extrapolation, he says space is normally 3-dimensional, although I would say 3 or 4-dimensional. And so therefore time is also 3 or 4-dimensional. And time progresses. It's always getting later and later and later. And therefore, by extrapolation, space is always progressing as well. Things are getting further and further and further apart. And that was evidenced by the recession of the distant galaxies, the expansion of space through the Hubble telescope that was determined through the Hubble telescope back in the day, in the 20s. And So that's where he's going from. So any type of relationship that you have between space and time is motion. The simplest example is speed. Speed is, the bike is moving at 15 miles per hour. 15 miles of space in 1 hour of time. That is speed. Acceleration is space over time to the second power. I dropped the stone off of the tower and it fell at a rate of 9.8 meters per second, or 9.8 meters per second squared. That is an acceleration. But you can flip it around and go the other way, the time over space way, and you have also all the other scientific entities being represented, such as energy. Larson derived that energy is time over space. It took me 3 hours to move that thing 10 feet. That is time, 3 hours of time per 10 feet of space. And in the same way, you have something that is called force. Force is time over space to the second power. And matter is time to the third power over space to the third power. And so when you have Larson's system where he gives you the time-space coordinates, so to speak, of all of these different scientific phenomena, you can go back and plug them in to various equations that scientists have developed over the centuries, and you can check Larson's system to see if it works. And that is another very attractive thing about Larson's system, is that it has built-in checks to it. And Larson himself said that the reciprocal system, notice it is a system of theory, not just a theory, but a system of theory. The reciprocal system is correct. But whether I have applied it correctly is a different question. I may have made some mistakes in my application of the theory, and those mistakes will eventually come out in the wash because they won't check. They won't stand up to checking it against the various checks that it has, the time and space components and so on. So Larson, it turns out, did make some mistakes in his theory, I believe, and other people that have followed him have attempted to correct many of the mistakes. He didn't make many. He made a few crucial mistakes, though, and those have been attempted to be corrected by people like Dr. Bruce Perrett, Dr. KVK Nehru, Dr. Gopi Krishna, and others over time. But and they have, I believe, also improved the theory that way. But right now, Dr. Bruce Perrett just recently passed away, and he was kind of the main engine that was driving the reciprocal system toward productive channels. So now, I'm trying to come along and not necessarily resurrect the theory, but just bring it to more people's eyes, and to emphasize how important this theory is, and that it deserves some serious attention because it is a game changer. And I do believe that when all is said and done, all science, the hard sciences, the soft sciences, and probably a whole lot of other things will be undergirded by the reciprocal system of theory. We will eventually, he has a society, they founded a society based on that, which unfortunately was called ISIS, which is the International Society for a Unified Science, that was arrived at back in the 70s. And That is what it is. It's a unified science. So now we're looking at chapter 13. We just finished chapter 12 on miracles. And chapter 13 is called emotions. Now, the background for the beyond space and time is that more or less, according to Einstein, the speed of light is the maximum speed of the universe. But for Larson, the speed of light is the midpoint of the universe, meaning there's half the universe that's moving faster than the speed of light, half the universe that's moving slower than the speed of light. The half that's moving slower is the half that we're accustomed to, and he calls that the material sector, or sector 1. And this is the realm of chemistry, atoms and molecules, inanimate objects. And then over here at sector 3 or sector 2 is the beyond the cosmic sector, which is beyond the speed of light, faster than the speed of light. And the way that it works is that a sector 1 unit, a slower than the speed of light entity, atoms and molecules, aggregates. It gets more and more complex through basic aggregation, just glomming on to each other. And once you get to its most complex level, which he says is DNA, a DNA molecule has several billion atoms, and that is the most complex. But that is actually the minimum that is required for a cosmic entity to grab on to this material entity and take it over, control it, in the same way that a thermostat controls the environment of a room. It's just a small component of the room, but it controls the environment, and he calls that the life unit. So life comes from this unification or grouping of the material unit and the cosmic unit. And then life evolves, which I don't know exactly about that term, but it evolves from the amoeba and so on, all the way up to the intelligent human being. The most complex form of life is what he says. And at that point, that becomes under the control of a sector 3 unit. Larson defines a sector 3 unit as a unit that is beyond space and time, meaning that it is independent of space and time, and that it is kind of precedes this whole space and time thing. And he calls that an ethical. So it turns the intelligent human being into a potentially ethical human being. And the human being is kind of caught in the middle of sector 2 and sector 3, where sector 2 objectives are giving it directions for survival, whereas the sector 3 unit is giving directions for ethical or good behavior. And the human has the choice. Sometimes those things are working in harmony, and sometimes they're working in opposition. Now, we just went through 4 chapters on things like revelation, insight, ESP, and intuition that are communication processes from sector 3, from this beyond space and time area, which you would probably want to call God. Larson calls it sector 3. Information received by an individual from sector 3. This is the beginning of the chapter on emotions. Information received by an individual from sector 3 through the processes of revelation, intuition, or insight discussed in the previous chapters joins with information communicated to him by other persons or received directly through his own senses, and the entire combination of material is then subjected to that individual's internal processes. In the next chapters, we will examine the aspects of these internal processes that are relevant to the general subject matter. One of the first of these reactions may be an emotional response to incoming information. And he goes through a little of the scientific literature here, but eventually says, for our present purposes, the important points to be noted are that the emotion is initiated by incoming information and that it results in action. Let us consider one of these so-called primary emotions, fear. When a situation arises that produces fear in a man or animal, the first result is physiological. Pulse rate, blood pressure, respiration, and many other body functions are altered to produce a state of physical readiness for action. The next result is action itself. If no deterring factor intervenes, the individual, whether he be man or animal, takes to his heels. Or, I would say, yes, I guess that is the result of fear, taking to his heels or running away, flight. Now, let us ask, what benefit does a human being derive from this fear emotion? The answer clearly has to be nothing at all. Human intelligence is quite capable of initiating flight if such action seems to be advisable. In fact, the currently favored theory is that the intelligence must authorize the flight even if fear is present. On that basis, there is no time saved, and in any case, the difference in time is not likely to be significant. Nor is fear necessary for the physiological preparation. When a situation that calls for emergency action is perceived, the body gets the shot of adrenaline that facilitates quick action, whether or not the fear is present. There is no good reason to believe that the further physiological changes induced by fear will improve this situation. On the contrary, experience shows that fear often results in ineffective action or even prevents taking any action at all. Paralyzed by fear is a description commonly applied in such cases. Thus, on balance, fear is definitely detrimental to survival, so far as the human race is concerned. This is not generally recognized in current thought. And then he goes into a commentator who's talking about Darwin and, survival. And Larson disagrees. The human race has found it advantageous to get along without the prehensile tail that was so important to its tree-dwelling ancestors. On balance, the case in favor of the retention of the fear emotion would seem to be no better than that in favor of retaining the prehensile tail. But it is true that unless this emotion had a survival value for some species, it could not have been produced in the course of biological evolution, which operates entirely on a survival basis. It follows, therefore, that the emotion of fear, just like the prehensile tail, must have had a survival value for the organisms in which it developed. The explanation clearly lies in the inferior mental capacity of the lower forms of life. Their brains are not capable of recognizing the threat, analyzing the situation, and originating flight, if flight is required, within the time that is available. For such organisms, it is advantageous to have a mechanism that initiates flight almost automatically. A threatening situation causes fear, and fear results in flight. Now he's citing Brooks Spinoza, but he's basically saying here that, because humans now have intelligence, have developed intelligence, they no longer need emotions. On this basis, the primary emotions, or at least fear, not emotions, but fear. On this basis, the primary emotions are precursors of intelligence. They enable non-intelligent animals or animals of very limited intelligence to react in certain classes of situation in a quasi-intelligent manner. But now that evolutionary development has produced a greater degree of intelligence, that intelligence arrives at better results in the great majority of cases because it not only takes into consideration the unique characteristics of each individual situation, rather than evoking a standardized response in each situation of a broad general class, but it is also capable of initiating a wider variety of responses. It would therefore be beneficial to man and perhaps to the higher animals as well if the fear emotion could be suppressed. The principal reason why the emotions have not been entirely superseded by thought and human activity is that these are separate processes that have evidently evolved independently. When one physiological feature evolves from another, as in the case of the evolution of eyes from light-sensitive skin areas, the change is gradual. But although emotion and thinking serve essentially the same purposes, they operate on entirely different principles. Okay, so we're going to stop it off there and start up talking about how thinking and emotions kind of serve the same purposes, but have this different sources. Okay, have a great day. We'll see you next time. Thanks for tuning in.